This is Dr. S. the Legend. He's back. I want to talk about Supreme Court ruling in gerrymandering as it affects the election coming up next November. Before I do, I want to get to two important Senate races. We had an election this past week. So let's talk about Texas first. I got my Texas hat on. So what we had was that Mr. Paxton defeated incumbent Senator Cornyn. Paxton got 64% of the vote to 36% for Cornyn. And on the Democratic side, Talarico defeated Crockett. He only got 52% of the vote, and she got 46% of the vote. So it's going to be Paxton versus Talarico. Now, keep in mind, in the election, and this is Texas now, in the election of 2024, Donald Trump got 1,558,347 more votes than Harris. He got 56% of the vote in Texas. She got 42%. Texas is a very red state, except for a few blue areas. Dallas tends to be 60% Democratic, and Austin 68% Democratic. There are two other areas which are very close, leaning Democratic. San Antonio 54% Democratic, and Houston 52%. So, other than those four places, the rest of the state is red and Republican. First question I have about Talarico is, since quite a few African Americans voted for Ms. Crockett, will they come out for Talarico? I don't know. And what about Mr. Talarico's strange positions that he's trying to walk back on, like anti-beef, being a vegetarian in Texas? That doesn't fly. And his views on God. God is, according to Mr. Talarico, doesn't really have a gender. You know, our Father art in heaven, nah, doesn't exist. And sort of an obsession with transgender issues. Now, what's very important with the Texas race and some of the other Senate races in the election next November, I would advise you to ignore the polls, because quite a few of them will say it's a close race, it's a toss-up. Already they're saying Texas is a close race, maybe a toss-up. Same thing for Maine, I'll get to that shortly. You have to understand what the polls do. They take a small sample, maybe 800 to 1,400 people. They don't do this for their health. They make money out of it. The more clicks they get, the more ads they get, the more money they make. So, the other thing to remember about Texas is they have not elected a Democratic senator since 1996. Another thing to keep in mind is that Governor Abbott is running again. He's a Republican, and he defeated Beto O'Rourke in 2022. He got 1 million more votes. So, based upon how many Trump got, 1.5 million, and Abbott 1 million, in order for Talarico to win, he's going to need a lot of people to split their ticket, or just to come in and vote for Governor Abbott and not vote at all, or vote for Talarico. I don't know if this is possible. The closest Senate race was in 2018, where Ted Cruz won by 215,000 votes over Beto O'Rourke. And in that race, the Democrats spent $80 million, and the Republicans only spent $45 million. So there's going to be a lot of money spent on Texas. You have to remember, Donald Trump is going to be all over Texas. There are important House races in Texas. Through gerrymandering, Texas has assumed probably the possibility of 4 more Republican congressional districts. So to ensure their victory, Donald Trump is going to come to Texas. And he's going to come to Texas a lot. And he's going to come to support Paxton, and he endorsed him. Who will come for the Democrat? for Talarico. I don't know, maybe Harris will show up occasionally, or Bernie Sanders, or Barack Obama, or some of the other people. It's my opinion that this Talarico candidate is a definite progressive Democrat, and I don't know if that is going to fly in Texas, in spite of the polls. Again, don't look at the polls. Just simply save your time, because it's a waste of time. Just go and vote and don't look at the polls, because the polls can be terribly wrong. Go back to 2016. Donald Trump ran against Hillary Clinton. There were 96 polls, and Hillary Clinton won 92 of the 96. And how did that work out for her? It didn't work out very good. So, and then the last election for the Donald Trump won, all the pollsters, too close to call. And they even had Ms. Harris winning the popular vote. And she didn't win the popular vote. So what happens when the pollsters get it wrong? Well, they have an out. They always say, well, we can be off plus or minus 3% or 4%. So when they get it wrong, they can say, well, we got it wrong, but we were within the margin of error, so therefore, don't hold us accountable. So then they're off polling again in the next election. There's no critique of them. So again, ignore the polls. I want to talk about the Senate race in Maine. So, in the last election for president, and Maine is basically a blue state. Although there's an area there that it's called Maine 2, where Trump won. It's a little complicated. But Trump got 45.5% of the vote in Maine. So, what's going on in the Maine Senate race? The incumbent is Susan Collins. She's a moderate Republican. This is her 6th campaign for Senate in Maine. She's a Republican, and she has won 5 straight times in a Democratic state, and she's running again. For example, in 1996, she got 55% of the vote. In 2002, she got 58% of the vote. In 2008, she got 61% of the vote. 2014, she got 68% of the vote. And 2020, she only got 51% of the vote, but the Democrat only got 42% because there was a bunch of independents. Last election in 2020, which was not a good year for Republicans, the polls had her, every single poll had her losing. And she won significantly, a 9-point difference, 51% to 42%. So, good idea. Ignore the polls. Who's the Democratic candidate? A guy with no experience by the name of Platner. How would I describe him? Socialist, Marxist, communist with a Nazi tattoo. And there are even some Democrats that are critical of him. So this is who she's going to be running against. And I predict that she will win. And of course the polls will have a close race, or maybe even have Platner ahead in the polls. Ignore the polls. What else can we say about Susan Collins? She's very popular in Maine. She has not missed a vote in Congress for 30 years. That's an all-time record. And so I don't think this is going to ultimately be much of a contest, but it's going to get a lot of play in the media. Same thing with Texas. You're going to have endless stories about Texas, about Maine. Ignore them. There's other important Senate races. Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, Michigan, New Hampshire. That's basically 7 races. Possibility of Alaska. And of course I predict that in order for the Democrats to gain control of the Senate, they're going to have to win 4 Senate seats. That's an uphill battle. And of course, again, the issue that Donald Trump is going to be campaigning in many of these states. In addition to Texas, he's going to be in Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, Michigan, and because he knows that he has to, and the Republicans have to maintain a majority in Congress. Because if they don't, he knows, and the Republicans know, that if the Democrats gain control of the House of Representatives, they're going to start impeaching him endlessly. So, if the Republicans gain control, and maintain control of Congress, in my opinion, it's going to be because of Donald Trump. And if they lose one house or both, it'll also be because of Donald Trump. And he knows that. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, let me get back to the subject of gerrymandering because of an important recent Supreme Court decision. So, you have to understand that there are 435 congressional districts in the United States. And I'll tell you shortly how they're divided. Gerrymandering is where the states get to decide the districts within their state. So gerrymandering means that they divide the districts in their state. Whichever party controls the state controls the drawing of the districts to benefit the party. So where do we get the name gerrymandering from, if you want to know? We combined a guy's name called Eldridge Gerry. You don't have to know. He was a historical figure way back in the early part of the Republic. And the word salamander. They threw these two words together and you got gerrymandering. There's two types of gerrymandering. Partisan, which benefits a political party, and racial gerrymandering, which benefits a particular racial group. There are, again, 435 House districts. Divided up, each one represents about 700,000 people. And the question becomes what people? And the Supreme Court has not decided what people. And maybe eventually they will decide. Is it just citizens? Is it visa holders? Is it green card holders? Is it illegal aliens? Nobody knows. So we'll have to see what happens. Just to give you an example of the representation in the House of Representatives, states that have large numbers of people get more representatives. California has 52, Texas 38, Florida 30, New York 26. And then there's some small states with not a whole lot of people that only get one. Wyoming, Alaska, Delaware, both Dakotas, and Vermont. So normally we redivide these districts every 10 years based on the census. Now they're doing it, both Democrats and Republicans are doing it in anticipation of the election in next November. So it's important that we talk about the recent Supreme Court decision concerning gerrymandering. And this also has to do particularly with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The case involved is called Louisiana versus Calais. I think I'm saying it right. Callais. This was decided April 29, 2026. And this was an opinion given by Justice Alito. It was a 6-3 opinion. He wrote the majority opinion. So let's go through the facts. And again, it concerns the Voting Rights Act of 1965. In 2022, a federal judge in the Middle District of Louisiana held that the map adopted by the state legislature likely violated Section 2, that's Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, because it did not include an additional majority black district. But when the state drew a new map that contained such a district, its new map was challenged as a racial gerrymander. A 3-judge court in Louisiana held that the new map violated the Equal Protection Clause, and the state appealed to this court, the Supreme Court. Another problem stemmed from the long unresolved question whether compliance with the Voting Rights Act provides a compelling reason to make justify the intentional use of race in drawing legislative districts. These and other problems convinced us, meaning the Supreme Court, that the time had come to resolve whether compliance with the Voting Rights Act can indeed provide a compelling reason for race-based districting. We now answer that question. Compliance, as properly construed, can provide such a reason. However, compliance with Section 2 thus could not justify the states, meaning Louisiana, of race-based redistricting. The states attempted to satisfy the Middle District's ruling, although understandable, was an unconstitutional racial gerrymandering, and we therefore affirm the decision below. Meaning, they said that the action of this federal judge to order a racial gerrymander, they created a majority black district, voting district. And here the Supreme Court says, no, 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 you can't do that. That's racial gerrymandering. So, historically, you had this Voting Rights Act passed in 1965. And what this did was it ensured that African Americans would have the right to vote. Because there were different things employed, particularly in the southern part of the United States, to deny African Americans the right to vote. The white primary, the poll tax, the literacy tax, the grandfather clause, and there were all kinds of other mechanisms. So, Section 2 said that no voting qualification or prerequisite to voting or standard practice or procedure shall be imposed or applied by any state or political subdivision to deny or abridge the right of any citizen of the United States to vote on account of race or color, which made sense in 1965. Okay? But now we have 2026. The court says any use of race in government decision-making generally triggers strict scrutiny in gerrymandering cases. A challenger must show that race was the government's predominant consideration. So they chose a map, which was called SB 8. And a group of plaintiffs, the Caliphs plaintiffs, asserted that the SB 8, and specifically District 6, was racial gerrymandering. And we'll describe the district. This minority district, which was a majority of African American. It stretched from 250 miles from Shreveport in the northwest corner of the state to Baton Rouge in the southeast Louisiana, slicing through metropolitan areas to scoop up pockets of predominantly black populations from Shreveport, Alexandria, Lafayette, Baton Rouge. The court concluded the map affected a racial gerrymandering that violated the Equal Protection Clause. If you can look at a picture of this gerrymandered district, it's got a bizarre shape to it. So, in considering whether the Constitution permits the intentional use of race to comply with the Voting Rights Act, we start with the general rule that the Constitution almost never permits the federal government or a state to discriminate on the basis of race. So what happened in this case is a group of non-minority, minority black voters sued. And they said this was racial gerrymandering. They were being racially gerrymandering. The state or federal government was identified as specific instances of past discrimination. The states and federal government have no compelling interest in generally remediating past discrimination, in a particular industry or region, etc. Our acceptance of race-based state action has been rare for a reason. This is important. Distinctions between citizens solely because of their ancestry are by their very nature odious to a free people whose institutions are founded upon a doctrine of equality. Obviously, the court doesn't like racial gerrymandering. At the time of the Act's passage, the nation had faced nearly a century of entrenched racial discrimination in voting. By 2004, the racial gap in voter registration and turnout had largely disappeared. with minority registering and voting at levels that sometimes surpassed the majority. And you had a two-party system emerging in the southern part of the United States. In a state where both parties have substantial support and where race is often correlated with party preference, a person that sues can easily exploit Section 2 for partisan purposes by repackaging a partisan gerrymandering claim as a racial gerrymandering claim. Let me read that again. So somebody that goes to court can easily exploit Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act for partisan purposes by saying it's a partisan gerrymandering claim as racial gerrymandering. In other words, you're saying it's racial gerrymandering where it really is just political gerrymandering. In large part because of the Voting Rights Act, our nation has made great strides in eliminating racial discrimination in voting. As a result of this progress, it is hard to find evidence relating to intentional present-day voting discrimination. I don't know of any example. I'm sure if there was an example, the media would report it. I've never heard of anything lately. Because the Voting Rights Act did not require Louisiana to create an additional majority-minority district, no compelling interest justifies the state's use of race in creating that map. That map is an unconstitutional gerrymandering, and its use would violate the Constitution. So what's happened is that the court has ordered that Louisiana do away with that artificial district. Now there was a further appeal, even though they decided on May the 4th, another appeal. And this appeal had to do with the fact, I'll read it, to permit the losing party to file a petition for rehearing. The clerk of court ordinarily waits 32 days after the entry of the court's judgment to send the opinion and a certified copy of the judgment to the clerk of the lower court. So quite often they have to wait 32 days after the decision. The Calais people who brought this lawsuit have asked for the clerk to issue the judgment forthwith, so that the event of judicial remedy, the district court may oversee an orderly process. Louisiana does not oppose this application. So basically, the members of the court, except there was a few dissents, have said this has to go into effect immediately. Now you have to also understand that once they issued this opinion on Louisiana, now it affects other states, because if there's another case, then they're going to rule in the same fashion. So there was a similar situation in Alabama. So the Supreme Court had to decide that. This is called Wes Allen, the Alabama Secretary of State, versus Marcus Castor. This was decided May 11th, 2026. Okay? So, the petition for a writ of certiorari before judgment is granted. The judgment of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Alabama in that case is vacated. That created another majority district, racial majority district of African Americans. So here they're saying, the Supreme Court saying, no, that's not going to happen. And they referred the case back to the lower court, the appeals court. And the appeals court, for some strange reason, ruled in favor of a majority black district. So now the state of Alabama is appealing it. The United States Supreme Court's going to have to decide this very, very shortly, probably next week. And they're going to rule, in my opinion, they're going to rule just like they ruled in Louisiana, that Alabama can go ahead and eliminate this racial gerrymander in Alabama. Because Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, you don't need it anymore. You understand, once they pass a law They don't normally unpass a law. The law stays on the books. So it was passed for a very good reason in 1965 because African Americans were being discriminated against. There hasn't been a case in ages. And what's happened is you've gotten federal judges have used the Voting Rights Act to set up in certain states racially gerrymandered districts. If you do that with one racial group, you're discriminating against another racial group. And that goes against the Constitution, and you don't want to do this. Now let me talk about the scorecard lineup in the 2026 election. What's happened so far as gerrymandering concerned? The Republicans have gerrymandered, and so have the Democrats. So here's the scorecard lineup. Potential. We're looking at the Republicans first. North Carolina +1, Ohio +2, Missouri +1, Texas +4, Tennessee +1, and now we got Louisiana by the Supreme Court +1. That is 10 right there. That are, it's not 100% guaranteed. You don't know how the election's going to go, but it looks like a +10. Now there's a potential for a few more. I'll get back to that. The Democrats have a +6. They've got +5 in California and +1 in Utah. Utah's a long story. So that's a +6. Now, we have 3 other states. We have 3 other states that are involved in re-gerrymandering. The first one I already mentioned is Alabama. And I think that's almost a slam dunk, that the Supreme Court is going to say that this racially gerrymandered district is unconstitutional and you got to do away with it. So that's another +1 for the Republicans, which brings it to 11. South Carolina has decided that they are going to also gerrymander to eliminate a district. And it will probably get appealed. The South Carolina case will probably get appealed to the state Supreme Court or possibly the United States Supreme Court. And then Florida has decided to also gerrymandering. And this case looks like it will just be decided by the Florida Supreme Court. I might add there are 7 justices on the Florida Supreme Court, and they're all Republican, and I think 6 and 7 were appointed by Ron DeSantis. So it looks like potentially, if you add these 6 more, that gets us to 16, and minus the 6 for the Democrats. So already the Republicans are a +10 advantage over what they have now in this election. Because Donald Trump wants a Republican House. Because if there's going to be a Democratic House, they're going to try to impeach him. And he's done everything possible. And they may want to impeach some of his cabinet members. So, in any way, there's also the possibility I discussed in previous podcasts that Donald Trump may have a very good constitutional argument against partisan impeachment, like the 2 previous impeachments, which were highly questionable, which I've covered in previous podcasts. So I just want to take some time here for a second and let you know about my podcast. It's Conversations with Dr. S, the Legend. That's me, with my Texas hat, and my email, drsthelegend@gmail.com. Here we go. Let's show that to the camera. That's my email if you want to contact me. Now look. You want to see the artwork that's behind me? It can be found at this website. All these Western paintings, pbensenior.com. The rodeos, the cowboy paintings. All right, this is Dr. S, the Legend, signing off.